Well, this is getting loaded. Real quickly, I'm Brian O'Malley. I'm a partner at Excel, and I'm going to be talking about deal generation. So this is finding new opportunities and finding your way in. And with this big mic here, I kind of feel like Tony Robbins. And so let's make this maybe a little bit more interactive. And so no need to wait till the end if you have questions. Feel free to I don't know what's going on here. Feel free to just jump in at any point, and that way it'll make it maybe a little more entertaining, a little bit more interactive. So I'm doing step 2 on the journey today, and so real quickly, quick background on myself. So this is actually a picture of my den about 30 years ago. My mom was nice enough to send it over, and so. My dad worked for IBM, which on one hand meant that we moved about every 2 years and lived all over the place. But on the other hand, meant that we got access to computers really early on. And so I was fortunate to grow up around computers, started working as a developer at Motorola when I was in college, and then ended up just falling in love with startups and helped start a couple, and then was an early employee in a third before I got into venture. So quick background on myself. So I think people have talked ad nauseum today and really over the last year about how it's a pretty frothy market right now. So I'm not going to belabor any time diving into that. But when it comes to deal sourcing, it creates kind of two complexities. So the first of which is that there's a ton more companies, right? So there's a lot of people getting started. There's a lot of angels that are funding a variety of different companies. And so there's a lot of volume that you need to find some way to sift through. The other thing is you now have a lot more channels to find out about who's doing well. So when it comes time to find out who's actually performing better, those companies get a lot of attention very early, and so it can be that much harder to actually get in the door at those companies. And so once you find them, you got to find your way in as well. And so those two things make it a little bit more complicated along the way. So the best way to go after it is really to find your own place to fish. So instead of going after all the companies that everyone else is going after, all the trends that everyone else is already thinking about, think about new market opportunities, think about contrarian ideas, think about different geographies. Because at the end of the day, if you can go out there and be the first or the only investor to reach out to someone, they're certainly going to take your call and they're going to spend time with you. So one of the companies I got involved with early on is a business called Insitu, and this was maybe 10 years ago, and it's a drone business. And this was long before venture people had any interest in drones. And they're based about an hour outside of Portland, middle of nowhere. They sold a lot into military, oil companies, mining businesses. And I reached out to one of their angel investors, this guy who's a very prominent entrepreneur in Seattle, was invested in lots of really interesting companies. And he wrote me back relatively quickly. And the only reason why was that I was the only one who pinged him on that particular company. So people would reach out to him all the time. They'd ask him about all of his other investments. And a lot of times he probably wouldn't get back to them. But this company actually ended up being his favorite, and was one that I pinged him on, and we started a dialogue. And about a year later, we ended up investing in it. So one of the other nice things that's available now is that there's just all these tools. So 10 years ago, you need to look up these arcane regional business journals. You need to go kind of dig up where you could find things. Now you've got tools like Product Hunt. You've got Angel List that help source things for you. You've got LinkedIn. You've got things like Rapportive that help you track down people's emails. And so there's a lot of tools available to figure out what's interesting and figure out what you need to get in front of. But something that can be really dangerous is just this concept of looking at things because they're interesting. One of the great things about being an investor is that you get to essentially learn as a job, and that's your full-time job, is figuring out new things and being one head around the curve. But it doesn't make sense to do that around things at the end of the day you individually or your fund are never going to actually write a check for. Not only is that a waste of your time, but it's also a waste of the entrepreneur's time. And that can ultimately get reflected back in your reputation that you just kind of kick the tires and don't really ever get there. And so Insitu was a unique situation because not only was it this drone business, but they had a very efficient channel to market. They sold predominantly through Boeing, and they had a much more capital efficient way of deploying. They sold the planes essentially as video as a service. And so instead of having to sell hardware and all the kind of crazy procurement process that would go into that, they were able to get to a business model that's much more efficient. And that was something that made it venture fundable, whereas a lot of the other guys in their space ultimately wouldn't be. Another thing that I think a lot of people waste time on is just kind of networking for the sake of networking. There's an event going on just about every single night out there. It's really easy to be busy. but busy doesn't always mean productive. And so when you think about events, think about what is the actual purpose for why you're going there. What are you going to get out of it? Because the reality is that investors don't just go tee up their best companies to you because you met at a party. And so a lot of times, if you look at the people who are at these events every single time, they're not always the most successful people at their firm, or they're not always the ones that are working their way up. So think about if you're going because it's social, because it's fun, that's great, but don't necessarily confuse it with work. Yeah, sorry about that. So like at the end of the day, this all comes back to just being ruthless about managing your time. So the biggest challenge in venture I always found was not a lack of opportunity, but it was really looking at a funnel and narrowing it down as quickly as you possibly can to focus in on things that were really unique, really interesting, and that you ultimately had a shot of investing in. And so this will come up again because this is kind of like the core thesis, but just be very thoughtful about your time and how you're allocating it. So look, it's great when you find things that are off the beaten path, but as I said before, the reality is that a lot of companies are already pretty well known. They already have something that's been written about them. Maybe they got into YC, maybe they got into 500 startups, and so there's already some filtering process that has played out, and so you're not necessarily the first one to give them a ring. And so that doesn't mean you need to just avoid these companies, but that means that you need to be a little bit smarter about how you actually get in. And there'll be bonus points for whoever can name all the background images at the end. So we went to the archives for a couple of these. So like the first thing, Finn, this one's for you. So the first thing is like you gotta stand out from the crowd. And a lot of times people talk about contrarian. Kate actually had a slide with the one light bulb that was up versus down. But it's much better to be polarizing in venture and maybe you only have 10% of people really love you and the other 90% think that you're a complete idiot versus have 50% think that you're okay. And the reality is that it's not a popularity contest. It's not about having a lot of people like you. It's about having a select group of entrepreneurs want you to be the one person that they're going to work with. And that comes from being a little bit different from the rest and, again, focusing in your efforts on a few people. So how do you stand out from the crowd? So the lesser you're known, the smarter you need to be. So if Jim Breyer were to send out a cold email to just about anyone in entrepreneurship, they'd probably get a response. And that's because he's been an incredibly successful investor for decades, and so he's kind of earned the right. The more junior you are, the more that you're an angel who maybe doesn't have a particular track record already, you need to just be that much smarter. And so it's not an excuse that you're not known. It's not an excuse that you don't have the right sort of network in. You need to over-rotate, and you need to know that much more about the market. You need to know that much more about the particular company. You need to know that much more about the people who are actually behind the business. And this is one of the things I always think is really funny. If you go to like any venture capital firm website, and I'll throw Excel in the bus as well, they're just not differentiated in terms of the way people think about themselves. So if you reach out to someone, don't tell them how much money you have under management, right? Like a lot of people have a lot of money under management. Don't tell them that you've been around for 30 years. Like it's great that you've been around for 30 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're relevant, especially when you talk to younger entrepreneurs that think that like makes you their dad's venture capitalist. And so if it's something that 3 other people can say the exact same thing, then don't bring it up. Don't mention it. Focus on things that are unique, or if it's not that unique, find a way to articulate it so that it comes across as being unique. So I just knocked the concept of cold emails. At the end of the day, I think the right cold email is way better than a tepid introduction. You've got things like LinkedIn out there where people are connected to 1,000 different folks, many of whom they haven't seen in years. And so instead of waiting around to try to get an introduction from someone who potentially knows someone, and in some ways you might be missing the window on an opportunity, go ahead and reach out to them directly. And this is actually a real email sent by a real associate at a real venture firm. And I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is actually a pretty big screen. But look, don't just say that you wanted their time. Don't just say that you're interested in a market. Don't mention 5 companies you invested in that have nothing to do with it. This goes back to the intelligence side of things. Pass the basic intelligence test, because a lot of times these emails are actually read. A lot of times they actually get forwarded to the existing board members because they're kind of funny. So realize these emails are getting read and that some of them are getting responded to. And the ones that are getting responded to are the ones that actually provide unique insight versus just kind of cut and pasted something that they read in TechCrunch. So look, if you can win with intelligence, that's great. But the next best thing is to have people like you. So at the end of the day, entrepreneurs spend a ton of time with their investors. This is a very long-term relationship, and so and they want to be with people that they like. It's just natural human nature. So one of our partners, this is a great story. He was courting this company that was in Utah. As those of you know, BYU football is a relatively big thing in Utah. So he watched BYU football games for an entire season just to understand who the players were, who had a good season, who didn't have a good season. So when you could talk to this entrepreneur, they could kind of riff on what the coach was doing or what kinds of things were going on behind the scenes. So it drove his wife mad that every Saturday he was sitting there not just watching football, but watching BYU football for a team that he had no actual affiliation with. But that got us in the door, and that ultimately I think is going to be a really, really interesting investment. So a lot of people forget this, right? Companies have lots of people. So CEO is getting lots of inbound emails from different investors. You don't want to be one of the 15 emails that's just sitting in their inbox. There are other people that work at the company. Product people tend to love talking about markets. Salespeople tend to love talking about just about anything. And so just go ahead and reach out to other people in the org. If you're the only investor that reaches out to someone who's mid-level, odds are they'll be intrigued enough that they'll take the call. You can learn something, and then you can rotate back to the management team now that you have a better understanding of what's actually going on behind the scenes of the company. This is another thing. I talked a little bit about email before. So the good thing about email is it is a direct channel into people. The bad thing is that there's essentially that email has the ability of being infinite, right? There's concepts of mail merge, which are great when you're sending lots of emails. They're not great when you're receiving a whole lot of emails. And so when you think about it, what can you do to have your contacts stand out and to show that it's actually a company that you care more about? This isn't one of 100 notes that you're sending out any given day. And so it can be as simple as just saying, hey, this is the only company I'm reaching out to this week, this month, whatever. Or it could be as advanced as taking the email, printing it out, writing a handwritten note, and then FedExing it to someone where you know it'll end up being on their desk. And so thinking about scarcity in the internet world where things are ultimately infinite, things are essentially free, and how can you show someone that this is a company that you're particularly excited about? So sometimes that doesn't work, right? So you can watch the football games, you can know everything about a market, and sometimes that's just not quite enough. And so one of my other former partners had this phrase where he would tell people that he was irrationally interested in their company. And this is something that like most venture people pride themselves on being rational and being thoughtful. But at the end of the day, a lot of entrepreneurs want people to be irrationally excited. It's going to translate into a better price. It's going to translate into someone who's really passionate about the company. And it was funny, when Andreessen Horowitz came on the scene, and I think it was 2008, a lot of investors kind of stuck their nose up because they had the reputation for just paying crazy prices for things. Well, if you fast forward several years, that actually got them into several really good companies. And it also got it so that a lot of companies wanted to go pitch them, because even if it didn't materialize in an investment, they knew they had a shot for someone who might pay an irrational price. So if all else fails, signal irrationality. So I interviewed at another venture firm before I originally got into the business, and it was funny, one of the guys there was known around the office because he had pinged a company 78 times before the guy actually replied back. And I thought this was this great story. I was like, oh, which company is this? Like, you know, where is it on your wall of fame? And like, oh, no, they never raised money. And I just thought it was like this really funny story that highlighted something that I thought was a big disconnect. Because if you're really persistent and if you're spending all this time trying to track someone down, but they're never going to take money or they're never going to take it from you, be more thoughtful about your time, right? Persistence just for persistence sake doesn't actually pay off in the long run. Okay, so through all these tactics, you're now in a position where you got the meeting, you're going to see them, you're going to figure out what's going on. Well, the first thing you want to do is don't ask people to come to you. I always think this is hilarious. I'll have one of my popular companies, and people reach out, and they're like, oh, well, come down to Sand Hill Road to see us. And as anyone who's dealt with the traffic recently, it's just the worst way you could possibly sell into any company is to ask them to come see you. And not only that, you lose a lot of intelligence about what the actual culture is like. Are the sales team, are they all just sitting there playing ping pong, or are they all on the phones? I showed up at one company once on a Friday, and I was like, where is everyone? And it turns out Friday at 2 o'clock, they have movie week, where every Friday at 2, they all go and watch movies. And so like that was something that was a total red flag from my perspective, and just highlighted that the culture maybe didn't have as much drive. And so that was something that I would have never learned if I hadn't actually gone and visited him. So get in your car, deal with it, and go see people. The second thing is when you're in front of people, this is an amazing opportunity to highlight what you actually know about a particular market. So don't show up unprepared. A lot of times entrepreneurs will look at the questions you're asking as a basic intelligence test for how much do you understand their business. And when they're dealing with you later and you're on their board, are they going to be spending all this time educating you on very basic concepts, or are you actually going to add to the conversation? And so, thank you. And so it's really important to show up, have something insightful to say, and at the end of the day, have the entrepreneur leave that meeting where that was a good use of their time, even if you never end up investing, because then they'll want to spend more time with you. And then if you pop up in someone else's company that they know, they'll have good things to say about it being a good use of their time. So ultimately, today, as I said before, things are very frothy. If you like a company, if people like a company, it moves incredibly fast. And so this goes back to this focusing element where when I first got into venture, it would be one thing where you would meet a company, you'd like it, and then that would mean that you would schedule a meeting for the next week. And then if you like that, you'd almost operate on this weekly cadence. And now the way it works is if you like something, you really need to jump on it, because if you don't, someone else will. And so go ahead, blow up your schedule, focus on it, and at the end of the day, if you want to win those hotly contested opportunities, you almost need to just constantly be in front of it. One of my partners is famous for, he's got the saying of just kind of sucking time, right? And so you want to think about over the last 72 hours before someone signs a term sheet, how are they spending more time with you, or are they spending more time with someone else? And that's a likely indicator for whether they're going to go with you guys or whether they're going to go with someone else. And this gets back to, again, this concept of managing your time. And this is something that I look at a lot of people who have been successful in venture, and not only do they work hard, but that's kind of a prerequisite these days, they're also very thoughtful about how they spend their time, who do they meet with, and how do they focus in on maybe 5-10 companies any given year that they're really excited about. Because at the end of the day, you want to be someone's favorite versus just be on the radar. So last thing I'll say, there's really no points in second place. Being the runner-up in venture doesn't help. Being the person that called Uber and knew that it was going to be really successful before it was successful, but didn't invest, that doesn't really matter. Being second place, looking at Slack, that doesn't really matter. So you need to ultimately be the ones that are the chosen partner. And the nice thing is, an earlier stage, at the angel level, they're going to choose multiple people. But as you get into the Series A and beyond, it's typically one new group that gets introduced every single time. And so go ahead and don't be afraid to, again, be a little bit contrarian, say things that might piss off some people but might get other people to really resonate with you, because you'd rather have some people love you than have everyone like you. So that's that. So I think we've got a couple minutes for Q&A. This is a surprisingly quiet crowd, but I guess that's okay. So does anyone have any kind of thoughts, questions they want to add into the discussion? Yeah, in the back.
How much hunting do you actually do, i.e., how much outbound versus inbound, being in at Excel?
Yeah. So let me repeat the question for. So the question was, how much hunting do we actually do? And I think it varies by title, and it also varies just by time of the year. And so a lot of times you'll have an entire week where you don't really get to spend any time looking at new stuff, just because one of your existing companies is raising. You've got a lot of board meetings. You're just in the middle of something else. But then you have other weeks where you maybe get to spend 20-30% of your time. And the big delta is when you're a junior person in a venture org, you maybe get to spend 80% of your time out finding things, whereas when you're more senior, you maybe spend 10% of your time. But you need to be just as efficient, even though you have way less time to spend on it. And from an inbound standpoint, we spend almost no time on the random inbounds over the transom, but we maybe spend, 10-20% of our time with introductions. But it tends to break into like 25% of the time on board portfolio work. That can rotate all the way up to 50-60% of the time, depending on board load. Maybe 25% of your time on administrative, fundraising, just random stuff that pops up. And then 25% of your time on finding new things, and 25% of your time on diligencing things. So it's quarter down the list. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some of the conflicts on the board of directors. Can you talk about the conflicts you face with other board members on boards and some of the conflicts you have when you're trying to resolve issues with CEOs you think are driving off the cliff.
Yeah, in like 1 minute or less. Okay, so this is like a pretty juicy topic, so that's the next 20 minutes. But look, conflicts of interest. So there's different types of conflicts of interest, right? So one can be your job as a board member to have a fiduciary responsibility to look out for the company, as well as your job as a shareholder to make returns for your limited partners. So that time, I think you just need to be very clear that, hey, this is me as a board member speaking versus this is me as a shareholder speaking. Other conflicts of interest tend to not come up as much because like we don't do angel investments on the side. We don't like sometimes you'll have people where they have a personal investment where the firm passed and then they get involved in some company. We just found that that's just too dangerous. We're better to be all eggs in on Excel and put that much more of our own personal money into our funds. And then in terms of not driving off the cliff, it's really tough these days because valuation has become this sort of metric for success as opposed to revenue profitability. Thanks, Kate. Got it. Okay. Sorry. So it's hard because there's that shiny object when exits are delayed, when there's more time playing out, and so we try to really remind people about at the end of the day, your job as CEO is to preserve optionality. And sometimes when you get yourself too far down one path, you lose the flexibility, and that not only negatively impacts you as a founder, but that can impact all of your employees to the negative. But it's a hard conversation to have because they look and say, hey, we're better than this company, and these guys just raised all this money. And you have to reflect back to what is success, right? Is the money there for a purpose, or is there money there more as a measuring stick? Yeah.
You referred to Andreessen Horowitz and their approach to funding, and yeah, in the last boom/bubble, Kleiner, the lower about Kleiner was that they could apply a 30% lower valuation than what other VCs were offering, and you'd have to take their money as an entrepreneur. How has the current climate sort of impacted how you all are thinking about valuation, both strategy and negotiations?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first off, I think Andreessen has evolved their strategy where they used to very frequently be the highest bidder, and now they still are that case, but not always. But I think that was their market entry strategy, which I think if you look at how much they've grown in a short period of time, that was a really good move. Look, I think there's the reality now where sometimes we think that we deserve a discount, and other investors probably think the same thing, and we're just not going to get it. And so at the end of the day, the 10% discount that you might get, or maybe it's 20%, it's really hard to get 30% these days because people will look at like how many people they could actually hire with a delta of 30% shares. But you can still get 10, 20% discounts these days. But the reality is it's all about being in the right companies. And you're better to pay a 10% premium for the right business than to get the wrong business at a 20% or even 100% discount. So we still like to think that, hey, people are choosing us, and sometimes choosing us involves taking a lower price, but sometimes choosing us is just more in their body language and the way they run the process and feeling like you're a partner through the process versus feeling like you've been teed up for an auction. So I think we're out of time. Thank you, guys.